Hi friends. If you're here, you're already stepping towards a better version of yourself. This channel, Path to Betterment, created by IIT Bombay alumni, is for those who want to excel in personal as well as professional life. Subscribe to our channel. Enjoy our videos to make every moment a chance for growth and inspiration. Daring Greatly by Brene author is an invitation to rethink the way we approach life, relationships, and our own self-worth. This book is built around a powerful idea, that vulnerability, the willingness to be seen, to take risks, and to be open to failure, is not a weakness, but rather a strength. Author's research highlights how embracing vulnerability can transform the way we live, love, parent, and lead, encouraging us to let go of the need for perfection and instead dare greatly. Through her own experiences and extensive research, author explores what it means to step into the arena of life, a concept inspired by a famous quote from Theodore Roosevelt. She encourages listeners to show up, to be seen, and to live with a courage that makes room for both success and failure. Author shares relatable stories of her own struggles with vulnerability, helping us see that the fears we have of being unworthy, not good enough, or incapable are universal. She shines a light on the cultural forces that push us towards shame, perfectionism, and disconnection, and offers strategies for breaking free. By listening to this audiobook, you'll gain insights into what vulnerability truly is and why it's essential to living a wholehearted life, a life filled with connection, creativity, and resilience. You'll learn how to reframe your fears, how to engage more deeply with others, and ultimately, how to embrace your true self. Daring Greatly isn't just about daring to take risks. It's about daring to be authentic, present, and courageous in a world that often tells us to hide. This audiobook is perfect for anyone who wants to live a more courageous, connected, and fulfilled life. So, as you listen, let these insights challenge you, support you, and encourage you to step into your own arena, ready to dare greatly. Chapter 1: Scarcity. Looking inside our culture of never enough. In this opening chapter, author explores the pervasive issue of scarcity, the constant feeling of never enough. She reveals how modern culture intensifies this feeling through social comparison, media-fueled perfectionism, and societal expectations. This sense of insufficiency is evident in many areas, such as wealth, appearance, success, and personal achievements. The scarcity mindset leads individuals to compete, fear judgment, and feel isolated, shaping a world where vulnerability is stifled and self-worth is undervalued. Author argues that the opposite of scarcity isn't abundance, but rather enough, and introduces the concept of wholeheartedness as a remedy. Wholeheartedness, she suggests, is built on the courage to be vulnerable, self-compassion, and a strong sense of worthiness. As the foundation of Daring Greatly, this chapter calls for readers to reassess what they view as enough and confront the narratives that make them feel inadequate. This beginning frames vulnerability not as a weakness, but as an essential path to authentic living and a fulfilling life. Bunking the vulnerability myths. In Chapter 2, author tackles common myths surrounding vulnerability, particularly the belief that vulnerability equates to weakness. She explains that vulnerability, far from being a sign of fragility, is essential for emotional growth and courage. The chapter highlights various misconceptions, such as the notion that vulnerability is about letting it all hang out without boundaries. Author clarifies that true vulnerability requires trust and mutual respect. It's about sharing with those who've earned the right to hear our stories, not indiscriminate self-disclosure. Through myth-busting, she dismantles fears that prevent people from embracing vulnerability, presenting it instead as a strength that enables human connection, empathy, and resilience. Author emphasizes that vulnerability is not about putting on a brave face, but about showing up authentically, even when there are no guarantees. By rethinking these myths, readers begin to see vulnerability as a gateway to courage, rather than a threat to be avoided. Chapter 2: Debunking the Vulnerability Myths. In Chapter 2, author dives into widespread myths surrounding vulnerability, beginning with the false belief that vulnerability equates to weakness. She challenges the idea that showing vulnerability somehow exposes a flaw or inadequacy. Instead, she asserts that vulnerability is the core of all authentic connections and the birthplace of courage, innovation, and growth. This chapter presents vulnerability as an emotional risk that's necessary for meaningful human experiences rather than a sign of fragility. To dismantle these myths, author addresses each one in detail. The first myth she tackles is the misconception that vulnerability is the same as spilling your secrets. Many assume that being vulnerable means oversharing or being overly exposed, but author clarifies that real vulnerability is about intentional sharing with people who have earned the right to hear our stories. It's not about indiscriminate openness, but about trusting others with our authentic selves in spaces that feel safe. The next myth she debunks is the notion that vulnerability is a choice some people can make and others can avoid. Author points out that vulnerability is a constant part of life. We can't escape moments of uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. What we can control is how we engage with these moments. By acknowledging our fears instead of suppressing them, we become more resilient, compassionate, and self-aware. Lastly, author dissects the belief that we can go it alone or that vulnerability is unnecessary for personal success. She shares research and stories that illustrate the opposite, that vulnerability is essential for real connection, creativity, and even professional success. When people recognize these myths for what they are, barriers to growth, they can begin to see vulnerability as a source of strength. This chapter ultimately reframes vulnerability, urging readers to view it not as a dangerous chink in their armor, but as a powerful path toward courage and fulfillment. Chapter 3: Understanding and Combating Shame. In Chapter 3, author explores shame, a silent force that often dictates our behaviors, limits our courage, and erodes our sense of self-worth. While vulnerability can open doors to deeper connections and personal growth, shame is the voice that whispers, "You're not good enough," or "You don't belong." Author describes shame as an intensely personal and isolating emotion that thrives in secrecy. Unlike guilt, which focuses on actions, "I did something bad," shame attacks the core of who we are, "I am bad," leading to feelings of unworthiness and disconnection. Author introduces shame resilience, a skill set that helps individuals face shame without allowing it to dictate their self-worth. Central to shame resilience is the act of recognizing and naming shame. Author argues that by identifying shame, we begin to reduce its grip on our lives. Rather than internalizing shame, she suggests that we openly talk about it with people we trust, breaking its cycle and diminishing its power. This process, which she calls Gremlin Ninja Warrior training, includes learning to identify shame triggers, situations where we feel most inadequate, and understanding how to respond to them. The chapter also emphasizes empathy as a potent antidote to shame. When we feel shame, our instinct is often to withdraw, but author explains that sharing our feelings with an empathetic listener can be transformative. Empathy creates a bridge between people, reminding us that we are not alone in our struggles. This connection helps dissolve shame's intensity and reinforces our worthiness. Ultimately, Chapter 3 encourages readers to see shame not as a permanent part of who they are, but as an emotion they can face, understand, and overcome. Through this compassionate approach to self-worth, author shows that shame resilience is crucial for leading an authentic and connected life. Chapter 4: The Vulnerability Armory. In Chapter 4, author examines the vulnerability armory we use to shield ourselves from emotional risk, hurt, and uncertainty. She explains that, although these protective strategies may feel safe, they ultimately prevent us from connecting with others and experiencing true joy. Author introduces 3 primary defenses: foreboding joy, perfectionism, and numbing, that we often turn to when we feel vulnerable or afraid. Foreboding joy is the first shield in this armory. It's the tendency to preemptively dampen our happiness, preparing for potential disappointment or loss. Author describes how we often curb joyful moments with thoughts like, "This is too good to be true," fearing that embracing happiness will somehow tempt fate. She argues that fully experiencing joy, despite its fragility, is essential to a fulfilling life and requires vulnerability. Next, author tackles perfectionism, another popular defense against vulnerability. Unlike healthy striving, perfectionism isn't about self-improvement, but rather about earning approval and avoiding criticism. Perfectionism, she explains, is rooted in shame and the fear of not being enough. While it may seem like a path to success, perfectionism actually keeps us from taking risks, embracing creativity, and connecting authentically with others. Author urges readers to let go of the unrealistic drive for flawlessness and instead embrace their inherent worth. Finally, she explores numbing, the act of using distractions like food, alcohol, work, or social media to avoid difficult feelings. Numbing creates a false sense of safety, but ultimately distances us from genuine experiences and relationships. Author highlights the importance of cultivating wholehearted practices, such as mindfulness and gratitude, as healthier ways to cope with life's ups and downs. Chapter 4 encourages readers to examine their own vulnerability armors and to consider the costs of living shielded. By putting down these defenses, author argues, we open ourselves to the full spectrum of life, its joys, challenges, and connections. Chapter 5, Mind the Gap, Cultivating Change and Closing the Disengagement Divide. In Chapter 5, author presents the concept of minding the gap, a phrase she uses to describe the distance between our ideals and our reality. She reveals that in a world where vulnerability is often avoided, this gap can lead to disengagement, frustration, and a sense of disconnection. Author argues that to close this gap and create meaningful change, we must first recognize where we stand versus where we want to be. This requires honesty, accountability, and the courage to step into vulnerability. The chapter explores how disengagement often emerges in environments, whether at work, school, or home, where individuals feel unsupported or unable to voice their authentic thoughts. Author emphasizes that disengagement is a reaction to environments that demand compliance and perfection over openness and trust. Leaders, teachers, and parents can unintentionally widen the gap when they prioritize control or certainty over connection and understanding. This chapter challenges those in roles of influence to foster cultures that allow for mistakes, learning, and, importantly, growth. To illustrate the steps to close the gap, author shares tools for cultivating change and building an engagement culture. She urges readers to take small, vulnerable steps toward living in alignment with their values, both personally and within their communities. This alignment involves setting clear boundaries, encouraging honest conversations, and taking responsibility for mistakes without fear of judgment. Author also highlights the role of self-compassion and resilience in bridging this gap. When we're able to acknowledge our imperfections without shame, we move closer to the life we aspire to lead. Chapter 5 ultimately calls for readers to take off the masks of perfection, build genuine connections, and commit to actions that reflect their true values. By minding the gap, we create spaces where engagement, trust, and authenticity can flourish. Chapter 6, Disruptive Engagement, Daring to Rehumanize Education and Work. In Chapter 6, author delves into the need for disruptive engagement to rehumanize the worlds of education and work. She argues that many schools and workplaces are built on cultures of scarcity, driven by competition, fear, and a relentless pursuit of achievement. This environment stifles creativity, connection, and courage, leaving individuals disengaged, burned out, and fearful of making mistakes. Author advocates for creating spaces where people can bring their whole selves, where vulnerability is welcomed and learning and growth are prioritized over perfection. Author illustrates how leaders, educators, and individuals alike can practice disruptive engagement. This doesn't mean disregarding structure or productivity, but rather challenging the norms that discourage openness and connection. In work and school settings, shame is often used to control behavior, keeping people in line through fear of failure or humiliation. Author calls for leaders and teachers to move away from shaming tactics and instead encourage curiosity, collaboration, and the courage to take risks. The chapter also highlights the importance of empathy and feedback. Author explains that real feedback is an act of vulnerability, both in giving and receiving. She argues that honest, constructive feedback fosters trust and growth, creating environments where people are encouraged to improve without fear of being not enough. Disruptive engagement requires leaders and educators to model vulnerability themselves, showing that it's okay to make mistakes and learn openly. By sharing examples from organizations and schools that have embraced vulnerability, author demonstrates that disruptive engagement can reignite passion, boost morale, and foster resilience. Chapter 6 is a call to action for readers to help build environments where people are valued as whole individuals, not just as employees, students, or outputs. It's about daring to rehumanize these spaces, making them places where everyone can show up, connect, and thrive. Chapter 7: Wholehearted Parenting, Daring to be the Adults We Want Our Children to Be. In Chapter 7, author explores the profound challenges and rewards of wholehearted parenting. She emphasizes that the goal of parenting isn't to raise perfect children, but to nurture resilient, self-assured individuals who know they are worthy of love, belonging, and connection. Author argues that to raise children who can live courageously, parents must model these values themselves, daring to show up as their authentic, vulnerable selves. Wholehearted parenting, author explains, begins with letting go of the myth of perfection. Parents often feel pressured to present a flawless front, fearing that mistakes will harm their children. However, author reveals that children benefit more from witnessing their parents navigate mistakes, conflicts, and challenges with integrity and resilience. She encourages parents to embrace imperfection, showing children that life is about growth, self-compassion, and learning from setbacks. The chapter highlights empathy as a core component of parenting. Author asserts that children learn emotional intelligence from parents who empathize with them, listen to their fears, and validate their experiences. Empathy, she notes, helps children feel safe to express themselves honestly, without fear of judgment or shame. It also fosters a deep connection that helps children trust their own worthiness, an essential foundation for resilience and courage. Author also introduces the concept of belonging within the family. She believes that by creating a home environment where children feel seen, accepted, and unconditionally loved, parents teach them that they are enough. This sense of belonging equips children to face life's challenges with confidence and self-worth. In this final chapter, author inspires parents to embrace vulnerability in their parenting journey, allowing children to witness both strengths and struggles. Wholehearted parenting is not about control or perfection. It's about showing children how to live bravely, love deeply, and embrace their true selves. Author's message is clear: dare to be the adults you want your children to become. As we conclude Daring Greatly, Brene author leaves us with a powerful reminder. Daring to be vulnerable, to show up authentically, and to live wholeheartedly is not a destination but an ongoing journey. Author's message is woven through every chapter of this book. Whether in our relationships, work, parenting, or personal growth, courage and vulnerability are essential to finding real connection and meaning. Throughout this audiobook, we've explored the importance of releasing the shields we use to protect ourselves, dismantling the myths that hold us back, and embracing vulnerability as a strength. We've come to see that vulnerability is the path to empathy, creativity, love, and belonging. Author's research and personal insights challenge us to resist the voices of shame and scarcity that say we're not enough, and to instead stand boldly in our worthiness. This journey of daring greatly asks us to step into our lives fully, with all our imperfections, knowing that by doing so, we pave the way for deeper connections and greater joy. Author leaves us with a call to action, to cultivate resilience, empathy, and courage in our lives, and to encourage these same qualities in those around us. Whether we're parents, teachers, leaders, or friends, our willingness to be vulnerable is what inspires others to do the same. So let's take this message forward. Let's dare greatly in our lives, remembering that it is not the critic who counts, but those who are willing to step into the arena, face their fears, and live from a place of love, purpose, and authenticity. Here's to a life lived fully, boldly, vulnerably, and wholeheartedly. If you enjoy such content, please like and share this video. Don't forget to subscribe for more updates and explore our other videos to dive deeper. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment to let us know how we're doing. Your feedback helps us improve, and those small gestures from you keep us motivated. Thanks a lot for watching.